Welcome to a new episode of Talking About Rules. Today with Kelvin Martin, BWF and Badminton Panam Umpire Assessor.
On behalf of Badminton Panam, welcome to all this presentation, which is a first of more to come. First, I would like to express our sincere wishes that all of you, your families and communities are in good health and following the required prevention indications like social distance, working at home, among others, and the required prevention while we have these times. We know these are difficult times for all of us, and we at Badminton Panam want at this moment to reach out to you, our technical officials group. We want to keep in contact. We can keep you informed about some regulations, guidelines, so you are all updated and ready for our return to normal status whenever that is, and we hope this in a short time. Thanks to Ricardo Salamanca, our events director, for this initiative of developing this activity, to our technical official chair, Mr. Enrique Charadan, for supporting this activity totally. And now, let me introduce now our presenter for today, Mr. Kelvin Martin from Barbados. Kelvin is our assessor for Badminton Panam and also for BWF. Among the nominations, the important nominations Kelvin has received in the past are participation at Olympics, at Commonwealth Games, at Pan Am Games, and then Super Series finals in Dubai. So you know that all the experience that Kelvin is carrying with him, and he's very eager to share with us today. Kelvin, thanks a lot for your being with us today. I'm sure we will enjoy a very nice and very educative presentation, and I leave the floor to you. Thanks, Kelvin. Thanks, Ricardo.
Thanks very much, Herman, for that those kind words. I also echo your sentiments to our TOs all across the region with regards to staying safe at this time. I think it's a good initiative on behalf of Pan Am to try to share some information with the technical officials. One of the mandates that we have at the international level is to try to share as much information with the continental technical officials so that we are all working towards the same high standard and one common standard. So hence the Badminton World Federation has been very proactive in the last couple of years in trying to ensure that there's information out there which can be accessed by the technical officials, which will help them to see, where we are and where we are going. The document that we are going to be reviewing here this evening, which is the ITDO, again, is one of those documents, and the whole aim of that, as I said, is to try to ensure that badminton is being officiated the same way, whether it's at a junior, national, or local tournament, or whether it's at the bigger stage at the international level. So I just want to share some information with you with regards to where some of that information can be accessed. Okay, and as I mentioned before, the purpose of the ITTO to standardize the presentation of badminton matches, to have uniformity in interpretation and implementation of the laws of badminton across the globe. Where can these and other materials be found? Some of you might be familiar, but again, we are trying to ensure that everybody has access to information. So if you go onto the BWF site, under the URL corporate.bdf.com. You will then be able to access the various bits and pieces of information. Unfortunately, it's not all put one place in one location. So you would have to know where to go to find this information. So under those, the heading of corporate statutes, chapter 2, ethics, you'll see players code of conduct. And players code of conduct is important because, again, that is part of the laws of badminton. And if you're going to be administering the laws of badminton, you need to know exactly what it is that players can and cannot do. Then there's a technical officials code of conduct. And again, that spells out, what is expected of a technical official and the do's and don'ts. 226 coaches code of conduct. And that is where it spells out what a coach can do at the court side. So when you're umpiring, you need to know exactly what it is that the coach is permitted to do at court side, so that you can then enforce the rules as necessary. Code of conduct in relation to betting. As technical officials, we are not allowed to bet on matches, so again, it's all spelled out there for you. Under the same heading, statutes, you have chapter 4, where you'll find the rules of the game. Section 4.1 deals with the laws of badminton. 4.1.1 instructions to technical officials, which is what we will be reviewing here in a few minutes. Section 4.1.5 vocabulary. 4.1.8 instant review system. Still under the heading of statutes, chapter 5, general competition regulations. And again, general competition regulations sets out what the various countries are allowed to have in relation to advertising and so forth, and what type of advertising is allowed for each stage or different levels of events. And in some instances, there are some countries which have special permission to have extra logos on their shorts and shirts and dresses in the case of the female. And the section 537 just gives you a summary, so there you can go on and you'll see whether it's mandatory or optional for country name, player name, and so forth to be on clothing. And under a slightly different heading, you'll see under officials and click on umpires downloads. And under umpires downloads, you'll see COC cocktails. And this is the BWF official magazine. And it's done on a quarterly basis. And not just because I am featured in the last edition, but it's a very useful magazine to keep on top of, because in there you actually have articles from the BWF technical officials committee chair, and also the umpires assessors chair, and the referees assessment panel chair as well. So they also deal with some on-court situations in that magazine. So it's a very useful magazine to keep on top of. So you can access that, as I said, under officials, umpires, and downloads. All right, so that brings us then to the meat of this evening's discussion. All right, the document basically is set out in various areas, and it starts with before you go on to court, while you're on court, what is expected when you're on court at the end of the match, and then some other general advice. So I will just start by going through the first section, section 5. And I will read some of it and just gloss over it, and then just emphasize the areas which I think you need to pay some particular attention to. Okay, so 5.1.1, it says obtain the score sheet from match controller umpire coordinator and ensure that the specified number of line judges and if applicable court attendants are present. And a lot happens during this area because this is where you're going to be expected to check players' clothing to see whether they comply with the regulations pertaining to the particular event which you are officiating at. So this is done during the marshalling area where you're introduced to the players. This also is the area where you will have an opportunity to have a quick chat with the players and the sort of information that you will be trying to gather from the players during the marshalling area would be the appropriate pronunciation for their names. And again, that is a very important aspect of officiating, to be able to, as close as you can, be able to pronounce the players' names properly and to introduce them in the manner in which they want to be introduced. As you are aware, there are some cultures where your surname comes before your Christian name, and then in others, the normal routine of your Christian name then being followed by your surname. The sheet also, the way it's printed, it would actually give you an indication as to which player or which team of players actually would be first in the march on to court. So you pay attention to that, and that will help you then to position the players in the correct order. Moving on to section 5.2, before the match on court. Carry out the toss purely and ensure that the winning and losing sides exercise their choices correctly in all six. And once confirmed, that they are noted. Get into the umpire's chair as quickly as possible after the toss. Start the stopwatch and then time the warm-up period unless instructed otherwise by the referee. The 2-minute warm-up starts when the umpire sits in the chair and ends with the calling of play to start the match. The umpire shall call ready to play to instruct the players to get ready to start the match at 90 seconds of the 2-minute warm-up period unless otherwise instructed by the referee. Now, there are situations where there will be variations to when you are expected to start the match. And this instruction invariably will come from the referee. And this information is usually given out at the umpire's briefing, which takes place prior to the actual staging of the event. And just to share some of the reasons why you might have variations, particularly on television court, the time allotted for the warm-up sometimes is not enough time so that the announcers can do the various announcements introducing the players and providing all the necessary background information for those who are following on television. So sometimes you might be instructed that rather than starting at 90 seconds, that you actually start at 2 minutes, right? So again, it's important to listen to what is expected for that particular event that you're at, and if there's any difference from court to court. The important thing there is that the timing of the interval starts when the umpire gets into the chair and sits down. So sitting down, automatically, the first thing you do, start your stopwatch, because that is when the official timekeeping starts. The other sections there deal with, noting the information on your score sheet so that you know who's serving and who's receiving. Section 5224, check that the line judges' chairs and coaches' chairs are correctly positioned. And it might become an issue sometimes where a coach might move the chair into a new location, and by doing so, they might be blocking the line judge from seeing or blocking the advertising that's at courtside, and that could be a very serious thing there. So you need to pay attention to ensure that once the chairs are placed in a particular position, coaches just sit down in the chairs and not move them around. I guess most of us would be familiar already with the standard way of announcing, so I wouldn't spend any time there. Just going back to the start of the match, one of the important things there that we want to emphasize is that when you make your announcement to start the match, you announce the players, and then you take a break, and then you say play. And the reason for taking that break and saying play is that we are trying to get across the fact that play now becomes an instruction. So you're now saying to the players, play. So if you just make your announcements and include play in the same sentence without the pause, it's just that you're making an announcement on a sentence as opposed to instructing the players that it's now time to play. Because you are the person who is in charge of the game, so you are telling them now it's time to play. So that's an important part of officiating that is looked for, by us when we are doing assessments and appraisals, that you're actually instructing the players to play that critical point at the start of the game. During the match, and it says here to use a standard vocabulary in WF statute section 415. So hence why I was trying to ensure that you know exactly where to find these regulations. And what you would have all been familiar with and being told before to record and then call the score. Section 543, again, during the service, if a service judge is appointed. Okay, right, so just talking about section 542 and reference there to when IRS is in use. Observe if a challenge is being made before calling the score. This is a very important point to note. So you wouldn't know if a player on either side is challenging unless you are watching them. So it now becomes second nature that when you are on a court with IRS, before you actually go to record the score, you need to have a look at both sides to ensure and to confirm that there's not a challenge coming from either side of the court. Section 544, which just speaks about being aware of the status of any scoring device and inform the referee in case of malfunction. There are times when sometimes there might be problems with the signal in a hall and the scores that you have on your scorepad might not be matching what is displayed on the monitor. So it is important to keep an eye on the monitor and make sure that there are no issues with regards to what the score is and what is actually being displayed. And if necessary, to actually call for the referee to have it rectified, and also to notify the players that there might be some difference between what is being displayed and what the actual score that you are announcing is. There's a particular section which seems to have generated some discussion before, section 5493. And it reads, a fault occurs under laws 1321, 1322, which are obvious. 1331, which the line judge calls and signal suffices, or 1332 to 1335, unless clarification is needed for the purpose of spectators when one of these faults occurs. There have been some changes where the expectation is for the umpire to announce what the fault that has been committed to the spectators, to the players. And there's a bit of vocabulary there which talks about flight. And there have been some instances where some persons have interpreted to mean that if the shuttle hits the net during service, that the service judge should be given a signal for fault, and that the umpire should be announcing flight. But that was never the intention. So I know that that is being worked on now to try to make the necessary amendments to all of the rules and regulations so as to erase that ambiguity which seems to be listed there. Okay, so most of the items there you would all be familiar with, and I would encourage you at your time to read through, become very familiar with what is listed there. 5-5 extended game. And this is just to reiterate that at the interval, at the point where the score becomes 29, then you need to announce game for both sides. So it's 29 game point, 28, 29 all. So you need to announce game for each side, and then the game then finishing at 30 points. Section 5-6, end of each game. Game must always be called immediately after the final rally of each game has been decided. And you see being decided there highlighted. And that could be with regards to whether there might be a challenge from IRS, which means that although the rally might have finished, you will still be waiting then for a decision from IRS then to finally decide whether the game has actually come to an end. So the reason for that highlight there being decided. After the games, we would do the usual announcement. First game won by, and after the second game won by, whether it's a team event or an individual event. And 5-6-4 at the end of each game, the umpire shall request the court attendants and judges to wipe the court. And this is becoming a standard requirement now, so that when the game recommences after the interval, there's no delay because the court is wet, right? So you try to do all of that during the interval to ensure that you can resume on time and you can get the players to recommence during at the end of the interval period. And again, having referred to the players' code of conduct, you would then realize that at the end of the match, the players are required to shake hands with the umpire and the service judge. So that information would be, as I said, reinforced the players' code of conduct and the goodwill formalities which are supposed to take place at the end of the match. And we will continue with your usual announcement, match won by, depending on whether it's a team or individual whatever. In the interval between game at 100 seconds, call the court number if more than one court is used, 20 seconds, and repeat the call. The usual vocabulary there to start the game, the second game, and then there's a third game, what you're expected to call. Okay, so we've come now to section 5.7 after the match. At the end of the match, the umpire shall note the end time, the duration of the match, and the quantity of shuttles used on the score sheet, if used. 5.7.2. If any incidents happen on a court that may be reported by the referee after the tournament, and what they're saying there that depending on the incidents that take place and are written down on the score sheet, the referees will then be compiling and recording and reporting on that information when they submit their reports. So they're trying to minimize the trivial amount of stuff that has to go into those reports. So it's only the important matters that you actually end up having to write onto the score sheet. So generally, again, the umpire's briefing, the referee will confirm, under what conditions they would actually want you to have the score sheet printed and then brought to them for them to sign off on. So it's not every incident that needs to be recorded. And it's sort of, when you highlight below, there says examples of incidents that do not need to be followed up with the referee after the match include a clothing violation, which was rectified by the player, an injury not resulting in a retirement, or suspension of play due to a minor repair to the court or its surroundings. So although the referee might have been called to the court, it's not every incident that needs to be noted and then reported at the end. Line calls. The umpire shall always look to the lines judge when the shuttle lands close to a line and always when it lands out, no matter how far. The line judges are entirely responsible for their decision, except in instructions 582, 583, and 584. And that's where you might have an overruled situation or an IRS fall. Now, one of the critical things there to bear in mind is that you will sometimes have a situation where, depending on where the shuttle lands on the court, it might not just be one lines judge whose call is important. So it's important not just to acknowledge one, but to acknowledge both line judges. And I'll just repeat that. you need to acknowledge both line judges when there's a situation where the shuttle lands close to two line judges. Section 582 deals with certain situations. So it says there, if in the opinion of the umpire, it is beyond a reasonable doubt that the line judge has clearly made a wrong call, then the umpire shall immediately call, and the vocabulary is listed there, correction in if the shuttle landed in, or correction out if the shuttle landed out. And again, the important thing there is to make that call immediately and not wait to be influenced by spectators or to be influenced by players. There will have to be a case where, in the opinion of the umpire, they clearly see that the shuttle has landed differently to what the line judge has called. Within that section of the law, they're then empowered, then to take the necessary action to make the correction. Section 583 deals with where there is no line judge. So if there is no line judge, or if a line judge is unsighted, the umpire shall immediately call. And again, you will see highlighted in section 58331, as the IRS indicates, the umpire shall call in or out as appropriate, the score or service over, followed by the score and then play. If the IRS indicates no decision, the umpire shall call let, followed by a score, and then play. So the important thing there is if the IRS is unable to make a decision, whatever call was made stands. So it might be a case where the line judge didn't see where the shuttle landed, so they called unsighted. The umpire can now ask for a review so that they can then call on the IRS to determine whether the shuttle might have landed in or out. And the important thing there is that whether the decision is in or out, neither of the sides are penalized for the umpire asking. It's a case of that there's a tool that's there to be used, and the umpire can use it in that case where they themselves are undecided to determine whether that was in or out. So it's not just there for the players to use, but it's also there for the umpire to use as well to help to arrive at making the correct decision. And the emphasis there is on making the correct decision. And just some technical clarification in 58333, if the IRS decision ends the game, the umpire shall call game, followed by the appropriate call as in instructions 562, 563, 565. The important information in that section would be not to continue now to announce whether there are one challenge or no challenge remaining. The game has been decided, so there's no need then to continue the routine of announcing whether there's any challenges remaining. So that's what's to be garnered from that section there. The umpire shall call here. I'll just read again section 584, which might clarify what I was trying to say earlier. Where an instant review system is in operation, if the call by a line judge, instructions H3 and H4, or call or overruled by the umpire, instructions 582, 583 is challenged by a player, Law 1752 and BWF Statute Section 418. The umpire shall ensure that the player has a valid right to challenge. The player must clearly say challenge to the umpire and make a clear signal by raising the hand. So to emphasize the information that's being conveyed there, you have to ensure that the player has a right to challenge, and just to confirm that you have an unlimited number of challenges until you get 2 challenges wrong, right? So there's no limit to say that you can only challenge 10 times. You can challenge as many times as you like until you have actually exhausted 2 wrong challenges. And then at that point, it means then that you have no challenges remaining. So then, therefore, whatever request you make would not be acted on if it's the case where there are no challenges remaining. And just to continue, after the player has observed the call made by the umpire or line judge, if a line judge changes the initial call, or the umpire overrules a line judge's call, the umpire shall make the players aware and permit a challenge made immediately thereafter. The instructions for challenges is that a challenge is to be made immediately, and there is still a certain amount of flexibility with regards to the statement immediately. And an example would be a case where a player might have observed that a shuttle landed in their particular situation, maybe out, not paying attention to the fact that the line judge has called in, and might be in their mind convinced that they have won the rally, so they're not paying particular attention. And only after maybe the umpire might have maybe announced the score, and the player realizes, hey, it's not what they thought it might be, and they might then make an appeal. So you might have had a few seconds going by since the shuttle ceased to be in play, and the umpire making the decision to call the score. But in a situation like that, it would be acceptable to actually accept a late challenge from a player under circumstances like those. So it's not a case of, the player has consulted with his coach who has asked him to challenge. It might just be one of those situations where what happened and what the player expected to happen was 2 different things, and they didn't realize what happened until some time had expired. And that then gave them the opportunity to make a late challenge. Section 585 just goes on to say, if there is a right to challenge, the umpire shall call the name of a player who challenges, regardless of whether it is singles or doubles match or a team tie, all in or out as appropriate, and at the same time raising the left hand above the head. And the raising of the left hand above the head is a case of raising your hand up directly above your head, and not just raising your left hand. It has to be directly up, so that it's clear that you're asking for IRS to review something on that match. Just going back to the actual challenge itself, the player has to indicate to the umpire that they are challenging. And they can do that by either verbally saying challenge or raising, you'll see that they will raise their racket up to indicate to you that they want to challenge. So those are the 2 normally observed means by which the player would indicate that they are challenging. And this back on the paragraph, it says the player must clearly say a challenge to the umpire and or make a clear signal by raising the hand. So we see an image there of an umpire raising his left hand in the air to indicate that there's been a request for a challenge review. 586, the instant review system will review the original decision and indicate to the umpire the result of the challenge as either in or out or no decision. So for those of you who have not yet had an opportunity to officiate at a tournament where there's an IRS system, after the IRS team has reviewed the footage, they will just simply come back to the umpire to show in or out. And again, this is where the umpire needs to be in full concentration when the result of the IRS decision comes back, because you will need to know whether the original call was in or out in order to now determine, well, whether it's a successful challenge or not a successful challenge. And just to share some of my own experience with regards to this, I found it initially challenging to try to remember what the call from the line judge was. And I sort of developed a little system for myself where I realized that when the player challenged, if the player was challenging on their side, it meant that the call was in. And if the player was challenging across the net, when I say across the net, over on the opponent's side, invariably the call would have been out. So with that little technique, it took a little bit of pressure off when the actual result came back from the IRS, because you can quickly remember who the player was who was challenging, then to realize, well, okay, well, if it was that player on that side, then they would have been challenging in if it was on their side and out if it was on the opponent's side. That helps you to get a little bit of time to be able to quickly analyze the information that's come back now from IRS in and out, how you're going to process that in your mind, and then make the correct decision in terms of the announcement that you make, and then finally in terms of awarding the point to the correct side. Because in my experience, I have found that it is a lot to process in a short space of time, and especially if it's not something that you're doing on a regular basis. It takes some getting used to, and I found that has worked for me, and I have shared that information with some others, and it seems to have worked for them as well. 587 goes on to, say what happens if a challenge is successful. The umpire shall call correction in or correction out as appropriate. The score or service over, followed by the score as appropriate, and then play. So while the IRS is reviewing the footage, there's actually a break in the match, which means that you now have to announce play at the end of the announcement of the score to instruct the players to resume playing. So at the end of every IRS decision, the announcement of the score concludes with the instruction to play. Section 5871, if a challenge is successful and thus ends the game, the umpire shall call correction in or correction out as a forfeit game, followed by the appropriate call as in instructions 562, 563, and 565. Section 589, if the instant review system indicates no decision, it shall be a let if the original call is unsighted. Right? So important there. If the original call is unsighted, it shall be a let. Otherwise, the original challenge decision shall stand. So if it was the case of that the line judge had called in and the IRS was unsighted, the call remains in. Right? The original challenge decision shall stand. Moving on to section 5.9, specific situations during the match. The umpire shall keep a careful watch for the following occurrences and deal with them as instructed. I wouldn't bother to read too much there, other than maybe section 5915, a player attempting to influence or intimidate the service judge or line judge in any form, audibly or visibly, shall be reminded that such conduct is unacceptable, with law 16.7 applied if necessary. Five nine one six just reinforces the current situation with regards to the throwing of sweat. A player throwing sweat, otherwise contaminating the court and its immediate surroundings, shall be reminded that such conduct is unacceptable, if law 16.7 applied if necessary. Right, so we are all aware now that you're no longer allowed to throw sweat on the court, and if there might be a situation where some of the older players who might be accustomed to doing that, you see it happen, you would immediately invite them to use their towel to reinforce to them that when you want to wipe your sweat, use your towel as opposed to throwing it on the court. Section 510, players leaving the court. The umpire shall ensure that players do not leave the court without the umpire's permission, except during the intervals described. So again, generally speaking, when the player wants to go off court, they must get permission from the umpire. It is now an accepted practice for a player to quickly go to the basket, grab the towel, wipe the sweat quickly, and return onto the court without having to ask the umpire's permission. And that is permissible. The only circumstance under which that might not be permissible, and you might have to remind the player that they need to get your permission to do it, is if it's in a situation where it might be a tactic being used by a player to delay the game. Under normal circumstances, you will see that, at the end of the rally, before the other side is ready to serve, the player darts off quickly, does a quick towel, and come back ready to play. And you will get situations where a player during that time might think that they can also have a drink, and that's where you as the umpire will ascertain your control of the match by reminding them, no, the permission is only for towel. And you might, when you're coming off, you might say a quick towel, or if you see them reaching for a water bottle, you simply say no, back on court, and you instruct them to get back on court. So what I was saying there just now is borne out in section 5.10.3, which says during the game, if player is not unduly held up, the players may be allowed to have a quick towel or a towel and a drink at the discretion of the umpire. If the court needs to be wiped, the player shall indicate to the court attendants where mopping is needed. The player shall be on court as soon as the wiping is over, before the attendants leave the court. So again, sometimes it becomes necessary to ask the players to show the attendant where they're actually asking to be wiped, as opposed to just going off the court and then leaving it then for the attendant to try to find, where the court is at. Coaching from off court, you can have a quick read there. I mentioned before that there's a coach's code of conduct, so under 5.12.8, you need to familiarize yourself exactly what that coach's code of conduct is. You will then be able to determine whether the coach is appropriately attired for being at the court side. Change of shuttle. The shuttle during a match must be fair. That's the important thing there. It must be fair. Injury or sickness during a match. And important there is that the tournament doctor may be called to apply sprayer only once to a particular player per match, except in irregular intervals. So just to reiterate what they're saying there, during the match, the player can ask the umpire to call the referee, who will then in turn call the doctor. And if it's a case where they have some injury that might need to be sprayed, they will come and they will do it. But that will only happen once during regular play. Other than that, it will have to be a situation where it is done during the interval. Because under no circumstance is the match to be delayed for the doctor to come to spray a player for a second time. Blood flowing injury, I guess most of us should be familiar with, so there should be no bleeding. (5.1.7) misconduct. Players are expected to behave themselves in a certain manner on court, and if they fail to behave in that manner, they can then be dealt with in accordance with law 66.4, where they're either given a yellow card as a warning or a red card as a fault.
Hi, Kelvin. I
Okay.
submitted my question to you via email. Could you discuss the topic for us, please?
Yes. All right. So the question that PJ submitted to me was in relation to what happens at the net, and the explanation that is currently being advised from the assessors to the umpires is the only person who can be faulted at the net is the person, let's describe the person who is making the stroke as the player, and the person who is on the other side, let's call them the defender. So we're saying the player is the person who is actually executing the stroke, and the defender is the person who potentially would be trying to block the stroke. The only person who could be faulted in that situation is the defender. So, case in point, there's a exchange at the net. The defender might have played a weak shot at the net, and the striker now has an opportunity to come in and execute whatever stroke they want, whether it be a smash, whether it be a clear, whether it be going cross court. The laws clearly state you cannot obstruct a player from making a legal stroke where on the execution of that stroke, the striker's racket goes over on the opponent's side. So again, to be clear, the defender is the only person who can be faulted at that point in time. We are saying clearly it's a case where that the striker has hit the shuttle on their side of the net, and following the racket follows through over. So it's a clear legal stroke on the side of the striker. So they're going to make contact with the shuttle on their side, and the law says that under that circumstance and that circumstance only could their racket potentially then go over the net on the other side. So, to be clear, it's not a situation where there must be a collision between players' rackets. The whole intention then is to not wait until that there's a collision, but to actually call fault immediately to stop the potential for the collision, right? So to reinforce the point, it's not necessary for there to be a collision, and this all has to happen close to the net. And once that is clearly understood, it's a case where, and you see it often, where a player makes a weak shot and then they stick their racket up, hoping that when the person hits, the striker hits the shuttle, that it will hit onto their racket and then rebound over on their side in an attempt to win the point. The ruling is that that's not allowed. So anytime you see the player at the net raising their racket up, you don't have to wait for a collision. Fault on the side of the defender. I hope that's clear.
Yes, Kevin, thanks very much.
You're welcome, PJ.
Hi, Kelvin. Can I follow up on that question?
Sure.
Specifically, it is the discretion of the umpire what is deemed to be close at the net in terms of the defender, because sometimes there may be an instance where the follow through of the player's racket when they hit the stroke may not necessarily impact with the defender's racket, but they may have still put up the racket relatively close to the net in order to reject the shuttle. So I'm just trying to understand, is it the discretion of the umpire there as to what would be deemed close?
Yeah, well, I guess the reality is that it's a very subjective determination, because a further clarification on that is being worked on, where they will add to that in the opinion of the umpire. So the umpire has to be of the opinion that the defender is close enough to the net to potentially obstruct the striker from making a legal stroke, right? And, as I said, there have been all sorts of suggestions that maybe the player might have rather than smashing to go over that, they might have probably go cross court or whatever. But once there's an opportunity, the striker cannot be denied that opportunity. And as you said, it all has to happen close to the net, because you can imagine that if a player is far enough away, that there's no potential then to obstruct or block them. If you're halfway down the court, at the back of the court, obstruction and blocking doesn't come into play. And I mean, just to give you an addition to that, it could be a situation where the striker executes a legal stroke and his racket goes over the net. The defender on the other side might not put the racket up and therefore commit a fault. The defender might be skillful enough to return the shuttle from close to the ground. And listen carefully. So the defender is returning the shuttle close to the ground, so therefore they're not obstructing the player. But in doing so, the defender hits the shuttle up and it hits onto the striker's racket. What happens in that situation? And the clear answer to that is, although the striker was in a legally strong position when he followed the racket over in the execution of the shot, he had no right leaving his racket over the net. So the mere fact that the defender now hits the shuttle up and it hits onto his racket, he's now committed a foul. Is that clear? Or do we need to further clarify that?
Yes, please. That's very clear. Thank you, Kelvin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone has any other questions in relation to this point, but I just wanted to know, in relation to the scoring device, when you're using the IRS system, does it note the amount of challenges left in the event that an umpire forgets how many challenges any one given player or side would have made?
Yes. The scoring device keeps track of the number of challenges. So it starts off. You start off with 2, and you can go as long as you don't have 2 unsuccessful. Because when you have 1 unsuccessful, when the result come back from IRS, you have 2 buttons to press. One is successful and unsuccessful, and then it automatically then deducts 1 if it's unsuccessful. So the machine will indicate to you how many challenges are left.
Okay, thanks again. And just to be clear, the challenges are always on the face of the scoring device, or is it that you have to press some buttons to find out how many challenges remain?
Yeah, well, they're always there, and it's a programming addition. So you will find that at a tournament, they might only be using IRS on maybe 1 or 2 courts, and those scoring devices that are used on those will have those 2 extra buttons on them for the challenges. And while we're talking about challenges, just want to reiterate a point there to the umpires among us who are experienced enough to be officiating at the international level, and who also hope one day to get to the stage of going for assessment, that it is almost mandatory now for them to have experience using the scoring devices. As a person who, just like the majority of you, are from a region where that experience doesn't come easy, and not just easy, but doesn't come at all unless you actually go out to a tournament outside of our jurisdiction. I am trying to ask the BWF to see what they can do with relations to maybe having some kind of virtual training opportunity for persons to practice before they actually go to the tournament.
Thank you, Kelvin, for your participation, and thank you all for attending this meeting. We hope to see you soon in our next Talking About Rules Badminton Panam Technical Officials Conference.